Assalamualaikum and very good day. Do you know, sometimes when you open the Netflix, you will spend ages just scrolling, trying to find the perfect show to watch? Well, this time, for our presentation today, class AM1204D from Group France has already created the ultimate docuseries just for you. So, let's hit the play. Bonjour Ni. Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Amani. Today, I will introduce you the key aspect of France economy. Let's get started. So, to give you a bit of a background, France holds the position of the 7th largest economy worldwide and is the 2nd largest within the Europe. Its economic structure is diverse with major contributions from manufacturing sectors such as aircraft production, pharmaceuticals, and also automobiles. Additionally, the service sectors such as tourism and financial services has also become a significant driver of job creation in recent years. Moreover, France maintains strong international trade relationships, notably with the US, United States. In fact, France ranks as the 3rd largest trading partner of the US within the European Union, highlighting a deep economic interconnection. Other than that, to maintain and strengthen its global competitiveness, the French government launched the France 2030 investment strategy. This is a multi-billion-dollar investment initiative focused on modernizing industrial sectors, advancing climate change efforts, and also fostering innovation in biotechnology and digital technologies. However, despite these strengths, France's economic growth has been moderate recently, with a real GDP growth rate of around 0.8% in 2025. This low growth is mainly due to ongoing geopolitical uncertainties and fluctuating energy prices that have been affected household incomes. Nevertheless, French households have maintained high saving rates, indicating cautious consumer behavior. This overview sets the stage for understanding the economic challenges and policies that France is currently navigating. Sans plus, to know more about how they tackle these challenges, maintenant I will hand over the presentation to my friend to explain the next topic, which is economic policies. Merci beaucoup, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Awin. Tolemon, Isi Ain, Montino, we're about to diving into the fascinating world of microeconomics, specifically looking at how a nation balances its checkbook. As detailed in the slide, fiscal policy is essentially how a government leverages tax strategies and public spending to keep the economic engine running smoothly. According to the famous economist, which is Musgrave, there is a threefold reason for this, which first, to preserve economic stability, second, to optimize resources, and the third is to cut down the inequality. Simple enough, right? Well, oh lala, it gets complicated. While many governments love to cut taxes to boost public spending and aggregate demand, France operates under a strict European Union governance framework. This means they are legally obligated to cap their national deficit and public debt. To manage this, few key frameworks are implemented by the France, which first is the National Medium-Term Fiscal Structural Plan. This to ensure any tax cuts and strictly balanced with spending limits, so long-term debt doesn't spiral out of the control. If you fail to do so, you are risked to face legal penalties under Article 126 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. Draft budgetary plans. These have to be submitted directly to the European Commission to assess how tax shifts impact the national deficit. Okay, so now let's look at the real-world numbers. France's ambitious plan aims to slash its national deficit from 6.1% down to 5.0% of gross domestic product (GDP). So how they overcome this? The solution was implemented by targeting tax increases on big corporate revenues, profits, payroll, and also polluting energy. Draft budgetary attention. As France's budget deficit crossed that 3% of GDP threshold, they have triggered European Union inquiries and are now bound with the excessive deficit procedure. In order to hit their ultimate target of bringing the deficit safely below 3% by 2029, France has to delay planned business tax cuts and enforce strict taxes on high earners and big corporations. They must closely follow a net expenditure path, step-by-step limit on total government spending enforced by the European Union to force an over-budget country to bring its deficit down. Then, they are required to submit those progress reports every 6 months. It is indeed economic tightrope walk. We just looked at taxes and government spending. Now, let's look at the other side of the economic coin. When the government handles the budget, who controls the actual cash flowing through the economy? As detailed in here, monetary policy is a set of tools used by a country's central bank to manage the money supplies and spark the economic expansion. In the euro area, this responsibility falls to the European Central Bank, also known as ECB, which manages the cost and availability of cash. You must be wondering, how do they do this? It's simple. They pull levers on interest rates to influence what commercial banks offer to everyday consumers. As stated, the ECB uses a trial of key interest rates to establish financial boundaries, which first, the deposit facility rate. This is to determine the interest banks earn on overnight deposits, that creating a baseline for consumer saving. Secondly, the main refining operations rate. This acts as the critical policy benchmark for the bank borrowing and also public credit. And lastly, is the marginal lending facility rate. This is to act as the strategy ceiling, controlling the cost of overnight credit to prevent market chaotic disruptions. The Governing Council leads a patient, medium-term approach as interest rate shifts take time to ripple through the real economy. Instead of panicking and overreacting to every temporary price fluctuation, the ECB carefully calculates its response based on the cause, size, and duration of an economic shock. This protects businesses from unnecessary chaos. Illustration here gives us a perfect historical example. From 1999 to 2012, inflation averaged above 2%, but economic shocks dragged it down to 1.1% between 2013 and 2019. Due to this, the public had mistakenly thought the ECB just loved the low inflation. But au contraire, it simply proves that keeping inflation at exactly 2% at all times is virtually impossible. That is why a balanced, medium-term strategy is the true chef-d'oeuvre of modern central banking. Now with that settled, I would like to pass the floor to Monami, Farah.
Bonjour everyone, my name is Farah Batrisyia and I will be presenting about the macroeconomics problem that happens in France. Before we dive into the data, let's take a look at the performance indicators, which are inflation and unemployment. Okay, for inflation, it can be defined as the rate of increase in price over a given period of time that will erode household purchasing power. On the other hand, unemployment refers to the situation where individuals who are able and willing to work are actively seeking for employment but unable to find a job. France recently experienced serious inflation due to global energy and supply crisis, but the problem is mostly fixed now, with prices have come down and inflation rate has dropped significantly. In contrast, France's unemployment rate remains high, which sparks concern within the country. Therefore, the unemployment appears as the most critical and suitable problems for us to analyze rather than inflation. As displayed here, this is France's unemployment rate graph from 2016 until 2026. To explain the graph properly, I decided to divide the graph into three graphs, which is from 2016 until 2019, 2020 until 2023, and also 2024 until 2026. To understand the root of this struggle, we have to look back at the historical timeline visible at the France's unemployment rate graph from 2016 to 2019. In early 2016, France was trapped in a severe crisis with unemployment peaking well above 10%, sitting at a harsh 10.2%. This was a structural failure caused by a high non-wage labor cost, strict corporate firing penalties, and heavily centralized union agreements that discourage companies from hiring. To fix this, the government introduced the El Khomri law. This law is regulations on economic layoffs, where they allowed companies to negotiate working hours directly with the workers, and also they kept the corporate firing fines. As you can see at the dropping bars leading up to late 2019, these changes initially worked, where companies felt safer hiring and the unemployment rate fell to a much healthier 8.2% by the end of 2019. And then come 2020, bringing the pandemic shock and bumpy shift, as you can see in the graph from 2020 until 2023. In the second quarter of 2020, the data shows an artificial decrease to 7.1%. This was not because the economy was healthier. Rather, strict national lockdowns meant people are barred from leaving their house to look for work. Under the strict International Labour Organization (ILO) definitions, this lack of active searching excluded them from the data entirely. When lockdown lifted at Q3, workers flooded back, which causes a massive spike to 9%. To stop mass corporate bankruptcies, the government deployed the chômage partiel furlough scheme, which they subsidized payrolls to temporarily save millions of jobs. By 2020 and 23, things normalized. Unemployment leveled out at 7.1% before hitting a 40-year low of 7.1% in early 2023. This drop was driven by massive youth apprenticeship bonuses and widespread of labor hoarding, where companies held onto extra workers during uncertain times just to avoid dealing with France's expensive firing law. Fortunately, the good news did not last long. Throughout 2024, the European Central Bank (ECB) raised interest rate in order to fight inflation. This, along with less global demand for goods, caused French manufacturing to shrink. As corporate profit dropped, companies stopped creating job opportunities and pauses hiring, which caused the unemployment rate to flatten out at around 7.3% by the end of the year. This low period quickly escalated into a serious and long-term employment crisis over the next 2 years. The rising bar on the right part of the graph shows this surge, where the rate climbed to 7.4% in early 2025, hit 7.9% by the late of 2025, and reach an 8.1% peak by early 2026. INSEE data shows that 2.6 million people are now out of work, with youth unemployment jumping by 2% over the year. What is driving the sudden 8.1% spike? It is the mix of regulatory changes and global economic roadblocks. On the domestic side, the 2023 pension reform pushed up the retirement age. This kept older workers in the labour forces longer, which expand the labour supply at the exact moment corporate hiring began to slow down. Concurrently, a new welfare policy requires all minimum wage Revenue de Solidarité active recipients to register with France Travail. This administration pivot instantly added thousands of names to the official unemployment registers. And on the global scale, weak economic performance and trade tensions finally forced struggling corporations to stop holding on to excess employees, which leads to widespread payroll downsizing. Okay, now I will pass the presentation to Alya to talk about the solutions for this problem.
Now that my teammate has clearly outlined how severe unemployment has become a long-term issue for France, I will guide through the solutions implemented by the authorities to overcome this crisis using the core economic tools. So, to rescue a stagnant labour market and to counter recent hiring freezes, the authorities must deploy an expansionary economic policy framework. So, this strategy uses a demand management tool to shift the aggregate demand to the right. So, this heavily lowers the production cost and encourages companies to recruit. So first, let's examine the fiscal policy, which directly managed by the French government through manipulation of government spending and taxation. So the first major tool is targeted government spending. In order for them to tackle the youth unemployment, the French government injects a massive capital into the labour market by offering heavy financial bonuses to companies that hire work-study apprentices. According to International Monetary Fund data, France's youth unemployment rate for ages 15 to 24 remained exceptionally resilient because of these subsidies. So the increase in targeted government spending directly puts money into households and boosts the private consumption, which is the tax relief. So to counter the high non-wage labour cost that historically has steered companies away from hiring, the government uses employers' social security contributions. So by them lowering the taxes, corporate production costs will drop. Meanwhile, it will shift the aggregate supply favorably. So this leaves the firm with a healthier profit margins and the financial liquidity needed to lift hiring freezes. So next, because the France operates within the Eurozone, its monetary policy is dictated by the European Central Bank, which is known as the ECB. So to reverse the hiring freezes by recent inflation-fighting interest rate hikers, the ECB, they shift towards an expansionary monetary policy by lowering their benchmark interest rates. Because mission mechanism. So what this means is, first, it drives the investment because cheaper corporate credit allows manufacturing sectors to borrow affordably. So when these companies, they can afford to borrow, they can build factories and buy their machinery. Secondly, it drives the consumption. So by lowering the interest rates on consumer credit, this way the customer can consume more because they don't need to spend higher. So over here is the formula that has been implemented as a solution by the ECB. So as both the consumption and the investment rises, the total aggregate demand curve will shift clearly to the right. So to keep up with the higher demand for goods, the French firms are forced to ramp up their capacity and halt their hiring freezes. And finally, actively recruit on unemployed workers. So in conclusion, by combining the localized French fiscal spending on apprentices with the European monetary easing, the authorities, they work hand in hand to stimulate demand and to drive down the cyclical unemployment.
Bonjour and Assalamualaikum. My name is Nurulain Aisyah. So we have heard from all the members about the France economy, and now we have come to the conclusion. Based on this research, we can clearly see that the France economic landscape has balanced its international strict governance with domestic crisis. While France has successfully managed to cool down its severe inflation crisis, but the domestic labour market remains under significant distress. Moving into early of 2026, the country faced a sharp upward spike of 8.1% unemployment rate, where it is actually equivalent to roughly 2.6 million citizens currently out of work. This sudden downturn caused by European-type monetary policies, aggressive interest rate hikes, shrinking manufacturing sectors, and also deep-rooted structural rigidities. Eventually, this led to the corporate hiring freeze across the nation. To reverse this trend and escape low economic growth, France must rely on a highly coordinated expansionary dual policy framework. On the domestic part, the French government is deploying expansionary fiscal measures. They are injecting funds into the labour market through financial subsidy for youth apprenticeship.
In addition, they're also easing corporate tax burden to lower overall production costs. Simultaneously, the ECB is introducing expansionary monetary policies. They are reducing the cost of credits by decreasing the benchmark of the interest rate. This directly encourages manufacturing firms to invest in expansion, where it also boosts up household consumption. Ultimately, by aligning this targeted fiscal incentive with flexible monetary conditions, France can successfully rebuild their total aggregate demand and steer its economy towards a sustainable with a long-term recovery. I think that's all for our presentation on France economy. Thank you so much for listening. A bientôt!